So at this point, this film is almost 20 years, a little over 20 years old. So it's kind of an old film, which makes me feel really old. So I believe there was 26 minutes cut out of this film from the original screening at the Cannes Film Festival. From what I read, a lot of the 26 minutes was the motorcycle racing, and a significant chunk came out of this opening sequence. It's been a while since I've seen this movie, but I think it's like 4 or 5 minutes long. So it must have been closer to 10 minutes, maybe, of just motorcycle racing with no real indication of how this plays into the story, who's winning, who's losing, or if that plays into the plot at all. So the movie does test your patience off the jump. A lot of the people that dislike this film do claim to like his uh his first film, Vincent Gallo's Buffalo 66, but a lot of that could just be a backhanded compliment where you compliment one thing just so you can insult the other thing even more. So I really question the universal love that Buffalo 66 gets. It's a movie that I liked. I haven't seen it in a while, but I question that a lot of these people love it so much and then they completely crap all over the Brown Bunny. For me, I like both films and I don't see like a huge significant difference in terms of, oh my gosh, it seems like a completely different person that made it. It's pretty consistent with his unique style. Um, and I could see both at the same filmmaker making both films. It's not, it's, I mean, it's a drastic change in terms of the ending scene in this movie that made it so controversial and so hated. But I don't know how genuine the love for Buffalo 66 is, even though, like I said, I do personally like the film. So famously, Vincent and Roger Ebert had a rivalry. Depending on the perspective of who's talking about the rivalry, some will say it's nasty, some will say it eventually became playful. I did watch a Howard Stern interview in which Roger Ebert did call in, and they did seem very playful with the rivalry, so it may have started off bitter, but after a few jabs, I think they were just having fun with it. From what I heard, after Ebert died, Vincent still started making nasty comments, but that seems more in line with his personality. I think if Ebert were around, things may have been just more back and forth. But since there's no one to go back and forth with him, I think it comes off even nastier. And obviously, since he hasn't done a film since this, he's probably just maybe bitter, angry, um, as time the passage of time goes by. People nowadays may not think much of a critic not liking a movie and how that would impact it because right now critics are kind of all lumped together on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's more about the critic score rather than individual critics. And back then, early 2000s, back to the 90s, 80s, the further back you go, the more critics kind of mattered and the more they impacted a film. You had critics that were almost celebrities. Uh, Roger Ebert and Roper, it's like two thumbs up, two thumbs down, thumbs in the middle. You had like review shows on TV, reviews that people read in the newspaper. Now, I don't think any one critic has any real power on, or impact on what a film can do. It's more about the overall score. Is it fresh? Is it rotten? And sometimes, even if a film is highly praised by critics, it still won't get fans to watch it. It'll maybe be a topic to trend on social media. But there are even some films that are trashed by critics. And because of that, people may want to watch it more to stick it to the critics. But back then, when this came out, Critics did have a lot more power than they do in today's society. So this rivalry with Roger Ebert kind of overshadowed the movie in a way, but it also put a spotlight on it as well. I know Kirsten Dunst and Winona Ryder were up for parts in this. I'm not sure if they were both up for the same part or they were up for individual parts and they both could have been in the film. But I believe this part is the one that they were probably both up for and they both ended up turning down. Or according to Vincent Gallo, I think he rejected them because he didn't like the way they did business, going through agents. He just didn't like the way the whole system worked. That's from his side. I don't know. Neither have really spoken enough about it publicly where I could find anything that they said in my research leading up to watching this. I thought the actors in this film did fine, and sometimes it's better to go with an unknown, especially when you're doing a type of film like this or any film that heavily relies on reality. Sometimes having a too familiar face can be a distraction. I don't know what they would have added to this film aside from stunt casting. I love the dirty windshield. I don't know if it was on purpose or if he didn't pay attention, but I just think it's a great touch. So, not to interject myself too much into this, but I am the one watching it. Um, I think part of the reason why I like this film so much is because I can relate to Gallo in a way, in that I'm an independent filmmaker who writes, directs, edit, basically does everything, including the artwork for my films. Occasionally, I do get people to assist with different things. I think one or two films I didn't do the art, but pretty much I do everything. I did have a partner at one point that did help me in terms of cinematography and co-producing, but that hasn't been for my last several films. And also, my films do have a lot of strong sexual content. I think this is kind of anti-pornography film, and my films kind of celebrate sexuality. They more embrace it rather than have an anti-stance on it. They're more made for eroticism. I think this is more graphic than my films, but I think my films are aiming for something that critics think this film is aiming for. I think this is the antithesis of what I aim for with my films as far as sexuality, sex, nudity, and sex acts. With a film like this that's highly artistic, you try to read as much into it as you can. You don't want to get to a point where it's kind of like an Andy Warhol thing where they're not really doing anything and you're adding meaning to something that had no meaning and it's just like a blank canvas and you're filling in the blanks where there aren't any blanks to fill in. It's just a blank canvas, literally. But, there are things there that he was obviously aiming for. The fact that his name is Bud, like Rosebud. Um, Also, it's going with the flower theme. All of the girls are named for different flowers. And his last name is Clay, like a pot of clay where you would put a rosebud in or put flowers in. And, the main girl, her name is Daisy. And you can make connections there with The Great Gatsby. So there are things like, if you look for it, it's there. And he was obviously aiming for something. I love the music in this film. I have done several films where it's just a character contemplating, and sometimes no music helps with stuff like that, but sometimes the right song can completely recontextualize the footage you're looking at. Because I've done several movies where it's just a character in deep thought, and the movies have different tones, the scenes have different tones. It is still a character in deep thought, but the song kind of changes, not necessarily the mood as much as it can completely change the genre or the stakes of what's going on. And I think the music does really well here with a lot of those silent scenes. where we're not getting a lot of talking, or we're not seeing a lot of character development in terms of action, but we're seeing development in terms of maybe mood, tone, more of a feeling and action. I found it interesting. Bud is a weird guy, and obviously a lot of that is explained towards the end. It's interesting that he saved all the character development for the end of the film. I think that's where a lot of people have the problem with it, is that they would prefer it all at the beginning, so that all of these scenes would have context. And I think by having it at the end, it makes you recontextualize what you see instead of contextualizing what you see as you go. But I found it interesting that the side characters, the very few other characters that talk and have dialogue, are also odd as well. It gives the whole film an odd feeling as opposed to just the lead character being this oddity. Almost everyone in the film feels like an oddity. I love the fact that you can tell it was just him and his camera. Knowing that there's not a big crew and it's likely just him setting up the camera and stepping in front of it. Maybe it's because that's what I do. Literally, I've done that for my last several films. But at the time this came out, I wasn't doing that. Like, I was doing a lot of stuff on my own, but I did have a cinematographer at the time this came out. So it's not just solely a me thing. I've just always found filmmaking like this incredibly interesting. Just being aware of what's going on uh, changes how you feel about what you're watching. And in a way, you're already breaking the illusion because you're thinking about what's going on set as opposed to just being immersed in the scene. But I don't find that a complete negative because I do watch a lot of Broadway shows, and you can be immersed and still be hyper aware that, hey, like, you have people just off stage, especially as I compare it to like Chicago, where it's a very small theater in New York, and you can see the actors at the side of the stage, they're not behind the stage. So you can see actors that aren't in the scene, like right there, and it still didn't really take you away from the performance. But you knew, like, this isn't like The Lion King or some huge production. Yeah, it's on Broadway, but it's lower budget, but it makes it more endearing knowing that it's not a huge production, that it's just more smaller. It feels more earnest in a way. It's funny with perception because I reviewed a film of John Cassavetes, Woman Under the Influence, and that's a movie that's similar to this in certain ways, and that it aims for like this hyper realism, which can sometimes feel unrealistic. But you have a lot of non-actors and, again, a lot of naturalistic attempts at filmmaking, some ad-libbing, stuff like that. But with the perception of that film is that Woman Under the Influence is this great film, and I end up saying some negative things about it. And this movie, which people hate, I end up saying a lot of positive things about it. But I don't necessarily would say that this is definitively better than A Woman Under the Influence in any kind of a way. But because the perception of the two films are so different, it's like it's not as hugely skewed in my eyes. So you almost talk less well about a film that you maybe like a little bit more than a film that you don't like as much, because you're trying to even out the gap that people have, but that you don't really see. Now, Gallo said he spent 4 years of his life on this film. I don't know if that's soup to nuts, like the writing process, casting, development, pre-production, production, editing, and everything, the whole thing, to be fully done with it. But I'm curious about that. This doesn't feel like something that production wise should have taken that long. So I'm thinking it's soup to nuts, it's everything. He's a very outspoken guy, but he also has a lot of quiet moments. I'm talking about Gallo, the person. And I feel like this character has a lot of him in it. Not the moments where he's just like insulting everybody, including like his contemporaries, his cast, his crew, critics, but his contemplative moments when he just kind of takes a step back and he talks about his insecurities. I see a lot of this character in him in those moments. I know he says wasn't autobiographical, but in those moments it really feels that way. Especially post this movie, he can have a lot of moments where you could tell this guy is just he's filled with a certain amount of self-loathing. What's the longest the bunny can live for? It's where that he is that way. I think he's a very complex person in that way, and that he's this overly confident, highly critical guy, super outspoken, super talented. He's a Renaissance man in a way. And then at the other end, we have this guy who's incredibly insecure, who just thinks he's completely worthless. And it's the same person, very bipolar. You're talking about a guy who has a strained relationship with his parents because his dad would constantly beat him, and his mother called him ugly as he started to develop in puberty. And he's also selling his sperm for $1 million to women on his website, and $50,000 to spend an evening with him, $100,000 to spend a weekend with him because he is the director of Buffalo 66 and the Brown Bunny. So it's an interesting guy. This is one of the few name actors in his film, Cheryl Tiegs, supermodel back in the day, one of the first supermodels. And this is where a lot of the critics of Gallo kind of like feast on him, and that they said, oh, he just wrote this part so he can make out with a supermodel. If I didn't tell you this was a supermodel, it's just a really old lady. No offense to her, we all get old, but there's nothing super about her at this point. I think if he was just really being like this narcissistic asshole that the critics try to make him out to be, he would have written the part for a supermodel in her 20s. She's an old woman at this point. I don't know if like making out with her is really that huge notch on your belt at this point. And again, this is in no way an offense to her. It's just a more of a comment on people who claiming he's vain. There isn't a lot of vanity in this scene at all. I think this is a tragic scene. And again, I'm not trying to paint Cheryl Tiegs in any kind of a bad way. I think she's great in this performance. And Gallo said this is the best kiss I think he's had in his life, was this makeout scene with her. I'm surprised she didn't get more work from this because she's really good. Yeah, she was born in 1947. This film came out in 2003. So we're talking about 56, mid 50s. She looks good for someone in her mid 50s, but she doesn't look like Jennifer Lopez or Salma Hayek, who are in their mid 50s, but look like they're in their mid 30s. She looks like an attractive woman who's in her mid 50s. And I don't know if like you're some horny asshole that like, you're getting this huge thrill about, writing a scene with a woman past middle age. When Cheryl T became famous, she was probably less than half this age. The scene itself is pretty interesting. It's kind of like two lost souls who find themselves on the highway, highway to hell, or the highway of lost souls. Um, but a lot of that is up for interpretation because there is no dialogue. And I think, yeah, he just stops on the street. I don't know if you remember if he was on the highway or not, but yeah, it's an interesting scene. I think dialogue may have taken away from it. I don't know if it would have necessarily helped it. And people talk about how brave it is for a lot of these celebrities who are in their 20s, maybe early 30s, to post photos, women on themselves on social media that aren't airbrush or that have no makeup. And it's like, oh my God, she's so stunning and brave and courageous. Well, here's a woman in her mid 50s who's on screen with no makeup. I mean, if a woman half her age doing it is brave, then I guess this is a really brave scene and brave of her to do, because she leaves herself up for a lot of critiquing. From the interviews I've heard with Gallo, he does do a lot of driving himself. So this is something that he personally does a lot. I did hear an interview with Vincent Gallo in which Mila Jovovich called in. She she seemed like she was a fan of his. At least she said that on the interview. Loved his work, loved this movie, and I think he tried to cast her in this and Buffalo 66 because he was talking that he tried to cast her in Buffalo 66. And I think I don't, I could guess I'd have to look up the timeline, but I think she was saying she was underage at the time. And I know that the girl he did cast, I think, was 18, Buffalo 66, the actress. Um, and from what she was saying, that he tried to cast her in this too. And in fairness to him, she did say that his pitch was that it was a porn film. So he wasn't trying to be deceptive with the actors in any way. His pitch to her was that it would be pornographic. So this wasn't a bait and switch or get ambushed on set type thing that, again, a lot of the critics of this movie, they do go in a lot of dark places, and that's one of them. So she was born in 75. This came out in 2003, so that would have made her not even close to 18. It made her 25, 28 when this came out. So she's an actress and she's a model. Most of them fudge with their age. But we'll see when his first movie came out. Maybe that's the one she was saying she was 17, but still, that I don't think the timeline would support that either. But let's see. Buffalo 66 came out in 98. And she was born in 75. That would make her 23 off the top of my head. 5 to 80 plus 18 plus 5. Yeah, 23. My quick math was on point. She was saying she was 17 when he asked her to do it. So, I mean, if she was 23 when it came out, um, maybe when he was conceiving it, she was in her early 20s, but there's no way she was 17. There's no way, like 6 years before the movie comes out, he's pitching it to her. That wouldn't make sense. And the girl who did get the role was Christina Ricci. I think reports were saying she was 17 or 18 when she did the role. Let me see if the math works out for that. She was born in 1980. Yeah, so she would have been 18 when she got it. When the movie came out, maybe like, 17, 18. The math works out. Supports that. Now there is zooming in the shot as he bikes off, so this would have been a scene where there was a cinematographer on set. And from interviews I've heard, I think he mentioned that he did drive professionally for a while, motorcycle. He's a true Renaissance man, painter, poet, did everything film-wise, acting, cinematography, writing, directing, musician, did it all. I wonder how differently people would have felt about the movie instead of the context for this character's self-loathing if it came at the beginning of the film instead of the end, instead of contextualizing how he feels if we um, did that instead of recontextualizing how he feels. Manchester by the Sea, I think was the name of a movie by Casey Affleck that was based on a book or something. But that was a movie with this, it's similar to this without the end scene, but it's just a guy who has every right to hate himself. Very depressing movie, but you had context in why he felt that way at the beginning of the film instead of at the end of the film. So, and that was a movie that was well reviewed. So I just wonder if he just inverted a lot of the character development, if that would have completely changed the way people looked at the film, the final product. I like how she flubbed the line, but still kept it in there. I just flubbed my line. I'm going to keep that in there. So kept it in there. It's entirely possible that I was wrong before, and maybe this was the part that could have been Kirsten Dunst or Winona Ryder. Or again, maybe they weren't up for the same part. Maybe both of them could have been in there. I don't think it would have helped the movie. Again, it would have been stunt casting, but maybe it would have gotten some positive attention because I thought these girls in these roles are fine. I think the acting kind of works well with the tone of the film. But I'm sure if it was a name actor giving the same performance, it would have maybe gotten the film maybe better attention because the film got plenty of attention, but maybe some better attention wouldn't have hurt. Or it could have backfired. They could have, went to their lawyers and their agents and found out about the blowjob scene. Maybe they didn't really know about it. Maybe that's why they didn't end up in it, and then tried to get the movie pulled or um, buried. I think this performance by Gallo is great. The first time I watched it, I was wondering like what drove him to this point because I knew about the BJ at the end, but I didn't know about the twist. So this guy is like tortured, and there's something about the names of these girls or something about these girls that's reminding me of his girlfriend. You're just wondering like, what is it? And even knowing it, I think doesn't take anything away. It just makes it more tragic. You lose the intrigue because you know what's coming, but you still feel terrible for the guy. I like how the film goes silent when it's these flashbacks of her. It's a nice little touch. There are some people who claim they love the film, but they don't love the ending. And I always wonder about that. If the ending were different and it didn't have the backlash, would it obviously wouldn't have the notoriety because it doesn't have the stunt casting either, because there's no Winona Ryder or Kirsten Dunst. So you kind of wonder where would Vincent Gallo be and where would this movie be if he would have just left out the sexual act completely, or had it been simulated and not real? Or even if it were real, leave it ambiguous in terms of the cut of the movie, where there could be talk that it was real on set, but it's shot in a way where you can't really tell in the film. Because there's ways to make a blowjob look super realistic without actually seeing penis in mouth. At this point in the film, when I first watched it, I knew that the climax would end up being him meeting up with Daisy and something happening. I had no idea she was a ghost at this point. With him, going to the parents, there's no hint that she was dead at that point. Him going to her house, calling for her, leaving a note. It just seems like there was a breakup. There's some kind of fractured relationship, and she's still around in some form or fashion, aside from being in his head. So when this twist came, it really was effective on me because I didn't see it coming. It's kind of like The Sixth Sense. A lot of people watch The Sixth Sense and they could see the twist coming, or they heard the twist was coming. But there's nothing like watching a movie with an interesting twist that comes at the end and you either didn't know it was coming, didn't see it coming, didn't know what the twist would be, but either way, it kind of hit you and works. And for me, this works. I didn't see um, not just the twist, but what's more interesting than the twist is how she ended up dying and his role in that, which is just heartbreaking. Vincent Gallo, the man, actually is also anti-drug as well. Chloe Sevigny, she was really good in Kids and American Psycho. Very good actress. I think her agency dumped her at this point when she did this film. And Gallo talked about the fact that when he offered her the part, he told her not to tell her agent and not to tell her long-term boyfriend at the time, just to keep it to herself. He also mentioned that she hated him at this point. They weren't on good terms. Um, and I know he did offer it to at least one other actress, Mila Djokovic. So it could be that, and he did say if she didn't take it, he wouldn't do the movie. So maybe he did cycle through a few different actresses before he came to her, not because necessarily he was settling for her, but based on what he said, they weren't on good terms. Not sure why they weren't on good terms, but he did also mention as well that they did date for a while throughout the making of this film. So it seems like they were on bad terms, made up throughout the course of the film, dated at some point during the making of the film, and then at some point towards the end, their relationship came to an end throughout the 4-year course of making of the movie. I wasn't able to hear the audio commentary for this because it's not widely available, but from what I heard, he did say that he was very nervous about doing the scene, the blowjob scene, and that they did shoot it twice. So not sure which version we're seeing here, the first or the second version of the BJ scene, but he did say they did it twice. I'm not sure if anyone else was here or anyone else was needed. I do know when I do my erotic scenes, I try to have very few people on set. Um, I don't think in the setup of the way this is shot that another person would be needed. I know it's handheld when she's doing drugs in the bathroom, but he's not there, so that just could be him doing the camera work. I love how she goes to the bathroom and frantically does drugs. In a few of my earlier films, I do have characters that coincidentally ended up doing like crazy things in the bathroom, a lot of the drugs. And then it just became a running theme in my films. And then when I saw this, I'm like, I have to keep that theme going. And in Ace Jackson's The Dead Man / Ghetto Heat, there are two versions of that film, one black and white, one color, with edited in different ways. I do have a character inspired by this that has a conversation with an ex and then periodically runs off to the bathroom, does a ton of drugs, and comes back out and talks. Directly taken from this movie. Gender's reversed because I was the character is who did the drugs. Argue. I gotta use the bathroom, do a ton of coke, and come back out. As opposed to here where she's doing meth or crack or something. The crazy thing is, I think this movie could have worked just fine without the real blowjob. Honestly, even if a graphic sex scene or just a fake blowjob, and I don't think the movie loses anything at all. Again, it's not that infamous, but it's not any lesser of a movie as far as the quality. Say what you want about Vincent Gallo. I don't think he would strive, even if he didn't give up filmmaking in the time of Me Too and cancel culture. But with all the pressure that must have been on Chloe to disown the film and to throw him under the bus, she never once said she was coerced to do the film or that she didn't like the film or she regretted her performance. she lost a lot in doing this. I don't think she gained anything. Certainly Vincent Gallo lost a lot. He regrets doing the film, according from his own words, and it cost him everything, ended his career in a way. But she never once, you know, pulled a Me Too on her or tried to cancel it or tried to get the movie pulled. She even said it's an art form that belongs in museums in an interview. I can really see why people don't like this movie who normally would, because it really is backloaded. I mean, the thing that makes this movie infamous is the blowjob. And the thing that makes this movie good is the twist. Neither of those things have happened yet. There's like 15 minutes to go in this movie. So it is really, really backloaded. All of the things that make it interesting, make it notable, and make it good really come at the very, very end of the movie. So you have to be super patient. Although this blowjob is on a lot of porn sites, it loses any kind of, if you find it erotic, because it's such a sad scene. There's nothing erotic about it. But even if you did, it just out of context, it just loses a lot. This only works in context. You really have to go through the whole movie to really see why some kind of act here, sexual act, would help the film. Again, it didn't need to be real. He could have just like had a simulated sex scene with her or a simulated blowjob scene with her, and it would have been just as good. I think this is another thing that makes people feel it's not consensual, is all of the whispering here. Is he coercing her to do it? And again, he clearly didn't, because according to Mila Jovovich, even when he was pitching her the movie, he said it was a porn. And Chloe never came out later. During the promotion of the film, after her agency dumped her, when Me Too became a thing, and said that she was coerced. But a lot of this whispering back and forth, people feel like it's negotiating that we're seeing play out in real time, and coercion. And according to Gallo, they did do the scene twice too. So the scene that ruined careers and put this movie into infamy. It's funny with her career arc, sex has played a huge part in her career. Kids, the movie that put her on the map, she was again part of a sex act that came at the very end of the movie. That was, I think, kind of graphic. If for nothing else, the fact that there was young kids doing it. With that came with a twist as well. That being her character had AIDS. And she was, I think, drunk or high or something. And someone forced themselves on her. The twist is about to come, just 7 minutes left in the movie. Powerful stuff. I did hear in the original cut at Cannes that at this point the car crashes. I don't know if it's suicide or an accident, and then a brown bunny appears and hops away, and then the movie ends. I don't know. I thought that ending would have been maybe better. This ending works as well, but I think that's the future of this character is suicide. I don't know how much self-loathing Bud can possibly take. Yeah, I think it cuts off any minute now, but yeah, another minute and a half or so. But powerful stuff, man. When I first saw this scene and she said she died, again, I didn't see. I mean, I think I may have seen it coming a little bit at that point, but it was still a powerful twist. And I've seen this movie several times. I've never just rewatched it for the BJ. I've just always watched the whole movie. And again, I like it. I think it works without the blowjob. But again, it wouldn't be infamous? Who knows? I don't live in a world where this movie didn't have the blowjob, but it would have been interesting to know if the movie could have achieved some similar level of notoriety, with just maybe some nudity or a graphic love scene without going so far as to alienate and destroy careers and take things to the level it did, and what other films could Gallo have made. But again, with Me Too, with cancel culture, maybe it's better that he lives on in infamy and his career ended before that stuff took off than for him to keep going and then be canceled at some point. Who knows? But all in all, I still love this film, and I think it's great. And hopefully you guys enjoyed watching it with me. And if you haven't seen it, watch it on your own. Great film. Thanks for watching.